Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Bronwyn Roberts, and I'm the Project Director for the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, also known as the REMS TA Center. I'd like to welcome you to the webinar addressing adult sexual misconduct in the school setting, an overview. This webinar will provide information on the topic of adult sexual misconduct, or ASM, in schools, and how schools and school districts can address this issue and better protect students through the framework of their Emergency Operations Plan, or EOP. Participants will have an opportunity to pose questions to today's presenters, both in a question and answer session that follows immediately after the presentation section of the webinar, and also on the TA Center's Community of Practice, or COP, after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the TA Center's website via our webinars page, along with accompanying resources following this event. Before we start, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. The following tips will help ensure you are able to download files, hear the audio, request technical assistance, and ask questions during the event. To download a copy of relevant handouts, use the Downloads box on the right-hand side of your screen. Select the name of the handout you would like to review and click the Download File button. As a reminder, there's no dial-in for this webinar. Audio is available via the link provided. If you're experiencing difficulty hearing the audio stream, please turn up your computer speaker volume at this time. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please contact the TA Center at info@remstacenter.org. You may also request technical assistance using the Q&A box. Questions are viewable to the webinar moderator only. Finally, to ask a question for the question and answer portion of this webinar, please use the Q&A box on your screen to send your message to the facilitator. You may pose questions at any time during the webinar, although they will be answered at the end as time permits following the presentation. If you would like to submit a question and are not able to via the box provided by Adobe Connect, please email your questions to info@remstacenter.org. So let's first take a look at the agenda for today's webinar. Our goal for today is to accomplish the following: provide an understanding of the topic of ASM in schools, provide information on how schools can help prevent incidences of ASM, such as through the development of appropriate policies and procedures and the effective training of school personnel, and discuss how schools and school districts can address this issue through the framework of their EOP via the federally recommended 6-step planning process. We hope you leave today with a better understanding of this issue and some concrete strategies to address it within your school district. After the presentation portion of the webinar, we'll move into a question and answer session. Finally, you'll have the opportunity to participate in a community of practice chat on the TA Center's website. But first, I'd like to introduce my co-presenters today. This webinar is hosted by your partners at the Office of Safe and Healthy Students and the REMS TA Center. From the Office of Safe and Healthy Students, we have Madeline Sullivan, and from the REMS TA Center, we have myself and Allison Curtis. Madeline Sullivan is a Management and Program Analyst in the Office of Safe and Healthy Students at the U.S. Department of Education. She serves as Contracting Office Representative for the TA Center. Prior to joining the federal government workforce, Madeline provided technical assistance on pro-social skill development, violence prevention, and school emergency preparedness after having served as a special educator. Allison Curtis from the REMS TA Center serves as the Product and Information Specialist at the REMS TA Center and oversees the development of the EOP interactive tools as well as the collection and distribution of resources. Additionally, she develops content for various training packages, webinars, virtual meetings, and publications. She's been with the REMS TA Center for 3 years, and previously she worked on research and evaluation projects for the U.S. Department of Education. And as I mentioned, I'm the project director for the REMS TA Center, a role I've been in for nearly a decade, and our team works in partnership with Madeline and OSHS staff to execute the mission of the TA Center and fulfill the department's goals to assist schools, colleges, and their partners in building their safety, security, and emergency management programs and comprehensive prevention efforts. Before we begin, we'd like to share with you 2 important documents that serve as a foundation for much of the information provided here today. First is the Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operations Plans. Following the events of Newtown, Connecticut, the U.S. Departments of Education, Justice, led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Homeland Security, led by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Health and Human Services work together to provide the best possible guidance to communities on how to plan for and recover from the many emergency situations they may encounter. Together, these 6 agencies drew upon their respective areas of expertise in the field and customized these recommendations to schools. As a result, one product created by the group was the Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operations Plans, also known as the School Guide. The guide aligns and builds upon years of emergency planning work by the federal government and, along with the guides for institutions of higher education and places of worship, is the first joint product of ED, DOJ, DHS, and HHS on this critical topic. The school guide describes how the 5 mission areas, prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery, apply to K-12 schools and describes a 6-step planning process to create a high-quality EOP. Each agency is now sharing this information with its respective state and local entities, and everyone is being encouraged to use the same process and guidance. Not only is this a first ever collaboration among federal agencies in this manner, but it is promoting similarly aligned collaboration all the way to the local level. The second reference is a training guide for administrators and educators on addressing adult sexual misconduct in the school setting. Inspired by our 2014 Government Accountability Office report on a review of efforts by states to address ASM, this new training guide is designed to help schools and school districts understand adult sexual misconduct, develop related policies and procedures, train on ASM awareness and prevention, and recognize the role of social media and technology in ASM. This training guide supports education agencies in updating their emergency operations plans and related ASM policies and procedures to be in alignment with national, state, and local recommendations, including the school guide. And today's webinar will be largely based on the content of these 2 guides, but will only scratch the surface of the content within them. So we really recommend that you download these from the File Share Pod to access later as you work to address the topic of ASM within your school EOP. So next, let's start discussing our understanding of ASM in the school setting. And for that, I will turn it over to Allison.
Thanks, Bronwyn. The U.S. Government Accountability Office in a 2014 report defines ASM as any sexual activity, physical or not, directed to a child with the purpose of developing a romantic or sexual relationship. Although some types of ASM, such as remarks directed to a student, may not be criminal, these actions often violate other laws, regulations, and professional codes of conduct. These gray areas can sometimes be subject to interpretation, which underscores the importance of developing clear policies and procedures on ASM in every school district. ASM is a broad set of behaviors that take place in the school setting. The behaviors may range from inappropriate to illegal. Nearly 1 in 10 students are subjected to ASM by school personnel during the course of their academic years. Examples of inappropriate verbal conduct include sexual comments and questions, jokes, taunting, and teasing. These may be delivered in person, by phone, or using electronic means. Modern technology, including social media platforms, include features such as image sharing and video streaming, which can be used to enhance teaching and learning, but also be used to provide readily available avenues for ASM, such as the exchange of sexually explicit comments and images with minors. As electronic media expands, we must remain cognizant of opportunities that students access that may be known to perpetrators be unknown to others. Examples of inappropriate physical contact includes kissing, hair stroking, tickling, and frontal hugging. It is important that school personnel understand what is considered appropriate and inappropriate conduct so that they can protect children at school and so that school personnel can take steps to protect themselves while interacting with students. By modeling appropriate adult behaviors, educators can help teach children protective actions as well. Illegal conduct is characterized by physical sexual contact between an adult and a child under the age of 18. This conduct includes sexual contact, genital contact, groping, fondling, touching, kissing, and sexual hugging. Exhibitionism, or showing one's genitals in public, as well as showing children images of sexual activity, are usually, although not always, illegal. Child pornography, sextortion, and other examples of child exploitation conducted by adults in an online setting are also illegal according to various state and federal laws. Since legal definitions of child sexual abuse vary by state, it is extremely important for school administrators and staff members to be acquainted with local laws and their real-life applications. You can learn more about the various state laws related to ASM on the State Resources Map on the TA Center's website and at the link on the screen. Child sexual abuse, including ASM in schools, is detrimental to children's physical, psychological, and academic well-being, as well as to their behavioral development. This victimization, whether through a single event or chronic exposure, can result in either short-term or lifelong effects that include maladaptive behaviors, mental disorders, developmental delays, social difficulties, and a shorter life expectancy. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC, views child maltreatment as a serious public health concern. The CDC defines child maltreatment as, quote, any act or a series of acts of commission or omission by a parent or other caregiver, such as clergy, coach, or teacher, that results in harm, potential for harm, or threat of harm to a child, end quote. ASM is one type of child maltreatment. Consequences of child maltreatment can include higher likelihood for psychiatric diagnosis as an adult, anxiety and vulnerability to problems such as post-traumatic stress disorder, conduct disorder, and learning attention and memory difficulties, difficulty establishing and maintaining healthy adult relationships, and increased risk for smoking, alcoholism, and drug abuse as adults, as well as engaging in high-risk sexual behaviors. ASM can be perpetrated by adults in all job categories within schools. One 2001 survey of a nationally representative sample of over 2,000 public school students in grades 8 to 11 by the American Association of University Women investigated students' experiences of sexual harassment, defined as sexual teasing, bullying, and unwanted touching. Students experiencing ASM reported that unwanted sexual contact most commonly originated from teachers at 18%, coaches at 15%, substitute teachers at 13%, and bus drivers at 12%. Research suggests that perpetrators in schools target students using the same methods as those who target children in other settings. They focus on vulnerable children, and they isolate, manipulate, and lie to them to gain sexual contact and make them feel complicit. To keep their conduct secret, perpetrators coerce and groom, that is, as sexual contact escalates, they methodically increase the attention and rewards they give to their targets. Grooming allows perpetrators to test their target's silence at each step. To nurture the relationship, perpetrators make their target feel special by, for example, brandishing gifts or spending extra time with the target in non-sexual ways, all in an effort to learn whether the target will keep silent. At the same time, the perpetrator is also testing the adults surrounding the child or school, including those who work at school, individuals in the school community, and the child's family or guardians. It's not uncommon for the behaviors to be done publicly, so the perpetrator can gauge reactions, share information, true or false, to manipulate how the behavior is interpreted by adults, and further control the child victim. ASM perpetration behaviors are often seen in three phases. The first is trolling and testing. The abuser is screening for possible candidates by testing the boundaries of the student, the home environment, and the school environment. The abuser is trying to identify a vulnerable child. A child may be identified as vulnerable because he or she is unsupervised, may not have close parental relationships, may be lonely or needy, may have inappropriate boundaries, or may have low self-esteem. Also, the target or vulnerable child may be one that the perpetrator has access to in a private setting. It's difficult to identify the motive during this phase. The second phase is grooming. Some of the warning signs in this grooming phase may be non-sexual and include the offender trying to move the relationship to a personal level, telling the student their personal problems, discouraging the student from talking with other school employees, or asking the student to run personal errands. The third phase is exploiting and lulling. This phase involves manipulating the student while becoming more aggressive with abusive behaviors. This includes both sexualized behaviors and other activity that is designed to keep the sexual relationship ongoing and undiscovered. Perpetrators persuade students to keep silent, either by intimidation or threats, or by manipulating the child's affections. Secrecy protects the abuser and isolates the victim. While we've only been able to provide an overview of the concepts defining ASM today, we hope this will help you to begin to understand the complexities of this issue and how important it is to devote time and resources to addressing it before an incident occurs. And next, let's talk about approaches to preventing ASM in schools. And for that, I will turn it back to Bronwyn.
Thanks, Allison. The well-documented and widely disseminated school district and school policies and procedures on ASM ensure that school personnel understand the behaviors that constitute ASM and send the clear message that there is a zero-tolerance policy in place. In addition, through policies and procedures, educators and other school employees and volunteers are made aware and frequently reminded of their responsibilities to prevent, report, and respond to ASM and suspected instances of ASM. Developing clear written policies and procedures ensures that all school personnel and volunteers receive consistent messages, understand the behavior that constitutes ASM, and are aware of their duty to prevent, report, and respond to ASM. It's important to communicate that the responsibility for protecting students from ASM is shared by the school board, the superintendent, all school personnel, volunteers, parents, state agencies, law enforcement, and even students. When we say students, we mean other students besides the victim. Protections for the victim and the concerned reporter, as well as precautions for the adult if the investigation results in no misconduct, are important too. The burden to report should not be on the child victim. Clear school policies spell out both appropriate and inappropriate behaviors, as well as the context in which they occur. Many schools find it helpful to include specific examples. The CDC recommends the development of precise definitions, policies, and procedures in the following areas: verbal, written, and physical misconduct, in-person and in cyber settings, as well as before, during, and after school, including acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. Education about ASM prevention strategies for students, teachers, administrators, staff, such as custodians, coaches, school bus drivers, and volunteers, as well as parents and guardians. Guidance for identifying and reporting behaviors that might indicate ASM, including an established child abuse reporting policy to the district and the authorized investigating agency as defined by state and federal laws, the establishment of channels for reporting suspected ASM, clear information about reporting to local law enforcement, the school or district system for triggering an investigation when an abuse is suspected, and mechanisms for reporting concerns to the state education officials that certify and license educators. Also, the legal consequences for a violation, the fact that both illegal and inappropriate conduct that will not be tolerated and can lead to termination of employment, and disclosure of formal reprimands or dismissals for violating policies on sexual misconduct to other schools seeking references. Procedures can also be developed that ensure close supervision of adult-student interactions, especially when interactions with students are highly personal. In some cases, behaviors that are considered ASM are obvious and illegal, but in many cases, actions are illegal and subject to interpretation. Since school personnel may have trouble determining the kind of behavior that is unacceptable or gray areas, they should be clearly spelled out in school district policies and presented in school and district training related to ASM. Examples of situations for which school districts may want to consider for policy development include the following: traveling with students and transportation issues, consider boundaries for coaches or chaperones when traveling for sports or other competitions, for example, after-school guidelines, as in when is it appropriate for a teacher to pay particular attention to a student by offering to help with after-hours study sessions, attention that may cross boundaries, for example, frequent compliments directed toward a particular student, overly personal cards, notes, emails, or teasing that references gender or contains sexual innuendo, social media boundaries, consider what types of interactions are appropriate between school personnel and students on social media such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or other platforms, or even when texting or emailing images, and relationships between students over 18 and young teachers. To address this, administrators may want to prohibit dating, spending time together outside of school for these situations. Circumstances that require school personnel to have close physical contact with students. For example, if assisting a special education student with using the restroom falls within a teacher's regular job duties, a documented policy and a tailored job description could prevent the investigation of a teacher based on a misunderstanding. So let's stop for a second and take a brief poll. The question we'd like to know is, are you aware of policies and procedures your school or district has for staff interactions with students? You can just go ahead and select the answer on your screen. Fantastic. It looks like we have 100%. Everybody's aware of policies and procedures for staff interactions with students, and that's where we want to be. So next we'll talk a little bit about mandatory reporting. Mandated or mandatory reporters are individuals required by state law to report abuse. In almost all states, school personnel, including administrators, teachers, psychologists, and nurses, among others, are considered mandatory reporters, but states vary in their designations. Mandatory reporters are generally those who have frequent contact with children. In most states, a mandatory reporter is required to report cases of suspected ASM to state or local child protection services. Some state laws also require that reports be made to a designated school employee. Variations in state laws are a primary consideration in the development of policies on mandatory reporting laws. Some school districts have developed formal agreements, such as a memorandum of understanding with local law enforcement agencies, and some school districts have formally required reporting for ASM crimes that happen in online settings, including sextortion and human trafficking, which are also defined in these documents as mandatory reportable incidents. A permissive reporter is an individual who is not a mandatory reporter and voluntarily reports child abuse or neglect. Anyone can be a permissive reporter. In at least 18 states, however, anyone who suspects abuse is mandated to report it, regardless of their profession. The role of the reporter is therefore not to investigate or evaluate the alleged abuse, but to report the behavior which raised concern to those charged with conducting an investigation. Obtaining the help of a child advocacy center, as well as asking clarifying questions of the child, however, is acceptable. So let's do one more poll question on this. Now we'd like to know, are you aware of policies and procedures your school or district has for mandated reporting? All right, fantastic. Sounds like everybody is from districts that communicate well, and we're happy to hear that. So next we're going to talk a little bit about Title IX. Federal law addresses ASM in schools through Title IX of the U.S. Education Amendments of 1972. Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any educational organization receiving federal funds. School districts that receive federal funds must designate a responsible employee for ASM reporting. This is someone who has the authority to take action or is assigned reporting duties or is otherwise deemed an appropriate school designee. In this case, a responsible employee may not be the same as a mandatory reporter. The responsible employee is required to notify the Title IX coordinator of any and all incidents where ASM is suspected, after which the Title IX coordinator conducts or authorizes a Title IX investigation. All ASM cases have the potential to violate Title IX regulations and therefore should be investigated under Title IX. Although Title IX itself is not a criminal statute, the behaviors that it prohibits may be criminal or non-criminal in nature, depending on state or federal laws. The U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights enforces Title IX and provides guidance, resources, and information to districts and schools to ensure discrimination doesn't happen, including addressing and responding to possible incidents of sexual harassment of students. In this context, sexual harassment is synonymous with the activities that define ASM. If schools ignore the sexual harassment, including harassment conducted in online forums of students by staff or peers, they can possibly face legal repercussions. ASM, whether alleged and unsubstantiated or alleged and proven, has a powerful effect on everyone in the school setting. Unfounded allegations can be devastating to the employee, the school, and the student. Even if the employee is ultimately exonerated, the damage has already been done and the stigma can linger for years. To avoid the misinterpretation of behaviors and the resulting fallout, interactions with students must closely adhere to documented policies and procedures. Documented policies that are carefully followed provide a safe environment for both staff and students to work and learn. This includes policies that prohibit false complaints. Educators and other staff members often have concerns about reporting suspected misconduct by a coworker or volunteer as they fear making a false allegation. The important point to remember, however, is that ASM policies are not about telling on each other or creating false allegations. Reports are not about being certain or correct. The purpose of reporting is to ensure that everyone is aware of what is going on for the protection of the child as well as the staff member. And as we just mentioned, the legal responsibilities for mandated reporting must be taken seriously regardless of personal feelings about another staff member or the degree to which reporters are certain abuse is taking place. The first line of defense in preventing ASM is the screening and hiring of staff members. While school districts share some common elements, specific approaches to hiring practices vary locally as well as by state. Some of these variations are due to location, such as urban, rural, suburban, or frontier. Some are due to budgetary limitations, and many variations result from the differing state laws that govern employees with unsupervised access to children. The overarching goal for schools should be the adoption of hiring practices that effectively screen for applicants at risk of posing harm to children. Every state in the nation has enacted laws requiring K-12 educators to have criminal background checks. In most states, background checks are also required for other employees, such as coaches, classroom aides, and bus drivers, who have unsupervised access to children. This measure helps prevent convicted felons from falsifying their identities to avoid detection. Schools depend on both state and federal sources of criminal data, such as state law enforcement databases, the Interstate Identification Index of the FBI, and the U.S. Department of Justice's National Sex Offender Public Registry to gather applicant information. However, it's important to note that background checks will not identify most sexual offenders since they may not yet have been caught. The background check is just one aspect of the hiring process, which should also include an initial face-to-face interview, follow-up interviews, reference checks, a public search of the applicant online, and any additional hiring procedures determined by the state or school district. Employment applications with evidence of the following should be red flagged: a break in the licensure record, mid-year or early departure from school, frequent changes in job positions, name changes, or frequent relocations. To help screen for potential ASM risk factors, scenarios can be prepared and incorporated into the interview process. These scenarios can require applicants to problem solve potential issues at the school and can help unveil boundary issues, indicate whether an applicant's level of insight and decision-making is in line with the district's and the school's code of conduct, bring to light knowledge about the district's child protection policies, and demonstrate an applicant's ability to respond appropriately to any number of issues or situations. Reference checks provide additional information about applicants and help verify previous work and volunteer history. Online public searches may also uncover relevant information on an applicant. The importance of creating policies and procedures that hold all school district and school personnel accountable for the prevention of ASM cannot be overstated. However, the steps we discussed today, along with others recommended, in some cases require a change in school culture, reinforced by an ongoing education process. Once the commitment is made at the district level to document school ASM policies and enforce them unconditionally, the need for comprehensive training in ASM is the next step. Training of school personnel should include the following: district policies and procedures, applicable state laws, recognizing warning signs in children, detecting patterns of ASM in adults, and responding appropriately when ASM is detected. Training should be ongoing and multifaceted and includes school personnel, volunteers, parents and guardians, and students. Professional development puts all staff on notice that there is zero tolerance of ASM. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Madeline to discuss integrating ASM into a high-quality school EOP.
Thank you, Bronwyn, and welcome everyone. Let's begin by taking a quick poll. Is ASM addressed in your school or in your district emergency operations plan? We have, yes, we have an ASM annex, or we have it via multiple threat or hazard specific or functional annexes, and I'm not sure, or I don't know. Oh, interesting. So it looks very much like it's 50-50. So some folks have an actual annex, and some aren't sure if it's addressed in the EOP. So the next few slides, or the next section, we're going to be talking about developing the EOP and also maintaining it so it'll be suitable for everyone. Okay, so all schools do have an emergency operations plan, or what we've been calling EOP. So the goal of that EOP is to keep the whole school community safe before, during, and after a threat or a hazard occurs. So EOPs address more than hurricanes and earthquakes and other natural disasters. They also address adversarial and human-caused threats such as adult sexual misconduct, or ASM. So the school guide that Brahman mentioned earlier recommends a comprehensive all-hazards approach to planning for emergency events. Essentially, an all-hazards approach means your school will want to take into account a wide range of possible threats and hazards that may impact a single student, an individual school, a district, or the entire community, while addressing safety needs before, during, and after an incident. Addressing these safety needs means identifying and addressing common functions that will support a wide variety, or even all sometimes, of the hazards and threats, such as communication, reunification, training, and exercising that plan. So with this approach, you don't need to focus on every possible hazard and every possible threat, but only those that your planning teams decides are a priority. So you'll find that most of these prioritized hazards and threats are supported through these common functions. As we mentioned earlier, the guide, we call it informally the guide. It's also, it was developed by 6 federal agencies in partnership. So it was designed to support interagency work at the federal, state, and local levels. So your partners should be receiving this guidance as well. And so the school guide describes how the 5 missionaries, which will be discussed on the next slide, apply to K-12 schools, and it describes a 6-step planning process to create a high-quality EOP and build preparedness. So as a nation, in all disciplines and by all types of audiences, we collaboratively approach preparedness with the 5 mission areas. The first being, one being prevention. Second is mitigation. A third is protection. Another is response. And the last one is recovery. It's just as suitable for addressing adult sexual misconduct as it is an earthquake. So prevention means the capabilities necessary to avoid, deter, or stop an imminent crime or threatened actual mass casualty incident. In this case, it means the capabilities necessary to stop adult sexual assault. Mitigation means the capabilities necessary to eliminate or reduce the loss of life or the property damage, and by lessening the impact of an emergency or an event. Protection is the capabilities to secure the schools and its children, its youth, and its students and staff against acts of violence and man-made or natural disasters. Response is having those capabilities necessary to stabilize the event once it's started or once it's happened. And recovery are those capabilities necessary to assist the schools, or in this case, the student that has been affected by the incident. And its goals are aimed towards restoring the learning environment and reintegrating the student back into the learning environment. So generally speaking, these mission areas align with 3 time frames associated with an incident: before, during, and after. So you can think about these efforts that can be made to prevent, protect, respond, and recover from an incident of adult sexual misconduct before, during, and after. So it's likely you've already learned many action steps that you can take to support children and youth in your school community. So prevention, by setting out clear expectations prior to any adult even considering working with or volunteering with the school or the district. You're already taking meaningful steps. This can be supplemented by conducting background checks and having staff do actual walkarounds and to watch the adults engaging with the students. We talked about protection. We talked about creating dedicated policies and rules regarding behavior, both for the adults and the students. And remember that you can include or push out, disseminate this message in multiple ways or different ways and in multiple settings. As for mitigation, we heard a lot about training. We want to educate, educate, educate. And we want to, in schools and school districts, you have all of these experts who have knowledge of effective instructional methodology that can help to put together strategies for ensuring everyone understands the key concepts such as recognizing and reporting adult sexual misconduct. And respond, report. As Bronwyn discussed, this cannot be a burden on the children and the youth. It cannot be their responsibility alone. So districts and schools must create procedures for reporting suspicious behavior. And they want to make sure that these procedures create some sort of sense of safety for the person who's reporting. And recover. The faster a victim receives support, the more likely they will be able to develop powerful coping skills and hopefully alleviate much of the trauma that interferes with healthy development throughout all of life stages. Now, let's take a closer look at the 6 steps. It's important to remember that these steps are flexible, and you'll want to revisit these repeatedly, whether it be because of lessons learned from real-world events or events that took place in your school community or in those nearby. So step 1, form a collaborative planning team. So here is where the planning team is established, and this planning team is likely going to include community partners as well as partners throughout the district or school, many of those stakeholders. For adult sexual misconduct, consider your leadership. Consider the counselors, the special educators, the school psychologists, nurses, and any of those that provide services to youth, and of course, our general educators as well. Consider your partners, such as law enforcement and child services. And then remember those additional state partners that we were discussing today. Step 2, understand the situation. In step 2, the planning team uses assessments to identify, evaluate, and prioritize threats and hazards that are likely going to affect the school and the surrounding community. In consideration of adult sexual misconduct, we know it happens, and we know it's underreported. So according to the CDC, nearly 1 in 10 students are subjected to adult sexual misconduct by school personnel during the course of their K-12 academic years. Well, given its negative impact in the individual children as well as to the whole school community, it's a priority. Schools should consider this with their partners as they set the priorities for the planning team. So in step 3, determine goals and objectives, the planning team develops goals and objectives for addressing adult sexual misconduct. So goals are broad, general statements that indicate the desired outcome in response to a threat or hazard. The planning team will then create objectives. Objectives are specific, measurable actions that are necessary to achieve the goals. So for example, a goal could be to prevent students from being victims of adult sexual misconduct at school. An objective might be to add this topic to a health or safety class. And it is recommended that for each goal, you create at least 3 objectives. In step 4, plan development, identifying courses of action. This is where the planning team is going to assign actions for accomplishing those planning objectives that you developed in step 3. Courses of action address the who, what, when, and how for response to each hazard, threat, and any cross-cutting activities or functions that are applicable in a range of hazards and threats, such as communications and notifications or family reunification. Remember, we want to use that all hazards approach. So here, you're going to want to describe who's going to lead each course of action and what they're going to be. So for example, if training will be developed to help protect students, who would develop or choose the curriculum? What methods would be used? Would it be integrated into an existing class? How frequently will students be taking the training? So you want to be posing these questions as a planning team, and the answers to them should help develop all of the courses of action. And now, step 5, plan, preparation, review, and approval. This involves drafting the whole plan, and then having the draft reviewed, getting approval by the appropriate leadership as well at the district and school, as well as by the leadership of your community partners. So for example, if you were to partner with law enforcement, their leadership would be reviewing it and signing off on it. Similarly with Child Protective Services. So this will offer another opportunity to get expert input from additional representatives from the partner agency's leadership. And since the plan clarifies roles and responsibilities for everyone, it will form the foundation of a strong support for children and youth before, during, and after a potential incident. In step 6, plan, implementation, and maintenance, the planning team is tasked with implementing and maintaining the plan, training stakeholders, and conducting exercises. We've discussed implementation and training throughout the presentation today. However, do not underestimate the value of maintenance and enhancement. The planning team and the school community should make efforts to keep current with social media as it makes children vulnerable. They should keep current and check the news and such for recent incidents, whether it be across the nation or nearby. They should be talking with their colleagues at nearby districts and schools, and even raising the issue with their state colleagues in efforts of learning more or receiving more resources. And similarly, always stay in contact with your partners and have those same conversations. In closing today, we've reviewed with you the topic of adult sexual misconduct, including the types of conduct that is inappropriate and illegal, as well as the gray areas it is important to define for your school staff and volunteers. The importance of developing policies and procedures for staff and volunteer interactions with students, as well as around mandated reporting and false allegations. We went over some hiring, some hiring practices you can use to help better screen candidates. And we talked about the importance of training everyone in your school community on these topics and relevant policies and procedures. Finally, we discussed how schools should incorporate adult sexual misconduct into their school EOP to protect, prevent, mitigate, respond to, and recover from incidents of adult sexual misconduct. Okay, so now we will begin our Q&A portion of the webinar. Oh, pardon me.
Thanks, Madeline. So as a reminder, to ask a question, use the Q&A box on your screen to send your message to the facilitator. You can also email us at info@remscenter.org. Questions will be answered in the order they appear and as time permits. And you can always follow up with us later with additional questions. The first question we had was, will this be recorded and available at a later date? And yes, it absolutely will. All of our webinars are available in archive format on our TA Center website on our webinars page, and this should be available within the next 2 weeks. Madeline, I have a question for you.
Thank you.
What should schools consider as they develop policies, procedures, goals, objectives, and courses of action in response to an ASM incident?
Oh, well, schools should organize an emergency response team who can provide support to students, school personnel, and parents if needed. And then from there, consider what their roles and responsibilities would be as well. Additionally, schools can implement protocols to coordinate the school's response with local law enforcement to ensure no one intervenes with a criminal investigation. It's also important to train parents and teachers to implement psychological first aid as appropriate. Furthermore, schools should implement recovery measures for the student, the reporter, and the school community based on their specific needs.
Great, thank you. Another question we received, do you know of any good sample policies used by districts and schools? Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Mm-hmm. I can take that one. Sure. We currently have a toolbox that we welcome practitioner examples of things like districts' policies. So if you come across any or you develop any, we welcome your submission of those. But we recommend that everybody customizes any policies that they develop for addressing these types of issues. It's important to check with your state laws. Like we've talked a lot about some variations in state laws that occur around this issue and the topics related to this issue. So it's important to consider what what's relevant in your state. And then it's also really important to work with your general counsel. And this is usually going to be at the district level. And your state may also have some resources and tips for addressing this already. So it's likely that you will have some resources available to you at the local or state level. And then if you're interested, we also have we mentioned our state map, and I'll just mention that again. We have for most states, some example legislation around this issue. And so that can tell you a little bit more about what other states are doing to address this, and can also lead to possibly some other sample policies and examples. Okay. As a reminder, you can go ahead and type in any questions on the Q&A box, and we will respond to them. Madeline, we'll have another question for you.
Thank you.
What are some examples of potential issues that can be found in employment applications and should be further examined and addressed during interviews, as well as the screening and selection process?
Well, employment applications can be an excellent source of information, but not in and of themselves. It's important to link this to additional information and look for gaps and such, and follow through and trying to determine why they exist. So sometimes your employment application will have evidence of something needs to be red flagged or investigated. So for example, a break in the licensure record. This might be for a perfectly acceptable reason, and it might be for adult sexual misconduct. So there's a number of reasons why the break would occur. It's important to try and do some to discover maybe some clues as to why. And then another example is a mid-year or early departure from a school post. or frequent changes in jobs and positions. So again, there can be perfectly positive reasons for these, or reasonable reasons for this, meaningful reasons for such a change or departure. But it's important to look into it. And then other things should be that should send off a red flag are things like name changes or frequent relocations and things like that. So these are getting to a point, is perhaps someone moving around after they get caught, or are they trying to evade something or avoid something? But again, it's important to remember use this information to look further into a possible issue.
Thank you. It's a great response. And we talked a little bit about this earlier too, and you mentioned that this may not be an indication of anything negative necessarily. And we talked about some other ways that you can sort of dig deeper on a candidate, such as face-to-face interviews and providing them some possible scenarios to respond to, so you can sort of give them some real-life scenarios to respond to. Reference checks that will give additional information about applicants and verify previous work and volunteer history. And then we also mentioned online public searches. Most people are online these days, so you can often find out more information there. Okay, great. Allison, I have a question for you. So we heard a lot of examples of inappropriate and illegal behaviors and gray area behaviors, but do you have any examples from positive behaviors we can do?
Sure, yes. Verbal, written, and online communications can be used as positive and supportive actions towards students, and let them know that they're a valued member of the class and school. And so some of those appropriate communications include praise, positive reinforcement for good work or behavior, humor and family-friendly comments, compliments that are not personal in nature, as well as interactions with students in plain sight of all with doors open.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful. We don't want to always just focus on the negative. It's important for, adults who are in relationships in the school setting to have a way to positively connect with students too. So it's great to have some positive examples too. Madeline, question for you. How do we get started with developing training on ASM awareness and prevention?
Oh, so let's see. Schools can work to identify areas that call for ongoing training and identify their staff members. Let's see. I would start with the guide that we have just put out. I would look to your state resources as well and your Title IX, speak with your Title IX coordinators. I would gather together that planning group and discuss with them some of the key topics, and then ask about available resources and such. But when you're thinking about implementing it, remember you want to come up with a timeline or a frequency, and don't forget you want to have everyone be trained. So it's not just educators, but it's all of the staff that work in the school, and it's all of the volunteers, and even those folks who come to the school every day but aren't employed by the school district or school. So think about that. And how maybe that can be incorporated into a contract or something. But as Bronwyn said, it's important to be customized, and then we want to remember everyone needs to get it, and think about those people who come in the middle of the school year. And then also you want to think about how that training is going to be developed. So is it going to be in person, or is it going to be virtual? Will it be interactive, or will it not be, and it just be reading and answering a few questions? And then also think about how it needs to be different for different audiences. So the responsibilities of a parent are a little bit different than the responsibilities of an educator. And then remember that with the training for students, they're going to have to be customized based on their age or phase of development. Did you have other thoughts, Bronwyn?
That's great. I think you made a really good point about how, it's really critical to train all these different audiences and to get this information out. But sometimes it can seem overwhelming since you have so many disparate groups and there is so much information to convey. And so I think it's always helpful to sort of, take the start of the school year to create a training plan. And you can think about the whole year and how you're going to address getting this information out in the variety of ways that you mentioned, the different modalities to all of these different audiences. So it doesn't feel quite as overwhelming as it might.
That's a really excellent point, so thank you.
Great. Okay, well, as we mentioned, if after today you have any questions on this topic or any other topics related to emergency preparedness, we encourage you to contact us at the TA Center at info@remstacenter.org or through our toll-free number. We are available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 Eastern Time. And you can also reach us by submitting an online TA request form provided in the web links section. So as you noticed, we probably we try to come up with a lot of ways for you to be able to get into contact with us and for us to be able to get into contact with you. We always have new information and resources that we develop or that are developed by our partners. So another way to find out about those is our Twitter account. You can connect with us on Twitter at REMS Center. So we have a very lively account there, and we encourage you to get involved, and you can share that with your partners in schools and districts so that they can get connected too. So finally today, we are going to conclude by moving over to our Community of Practice web chat. And so we have started a new forum on our Community of Practice to discuss this topic in more detail. And we encourage you to pose questions to our team or your colleagues or to share resources on this topic. So like I mentioned, if you have anything that you've already developed on this topic and you'd like to share it, we certainly welcome you to post it there. To access this forum, you just log into our Community of Practice. The login button is available at the top of our site. And once you're logged in, click on the K-12 Public Forums and go to the Addressing Adult Sexual Misconduct web chat. If you have any issues accessing the forum, feel free to email us, again, at info@remstacenter.org. And so we are going to be over there for about 30 minutes to answer additional questions and talk about some of the topics that we discussed today in a little bit more depth. And so we certainly welcome all of you to join us over there. Thank you so much. And